You can walk 10,000 steps a day, eat clean, even train consistently for months, and your belly fat can still remain exactly where it is. Not because you lack discipline, not because you are not doing enough, but because your body is misreading the signal you are sending it. We need to begin with an uncomfortable truth. The body does not count steps. It does not care how many calories your phone application says you burned. It reads only two things: oxygen, availability, and the level of threat perceived by the nervous system. Based on those two signals, it decides whether to burn sugar or burn fat. In exercise physiology, this is called fuel selection. Your body is like a hybrid engine. It has two primary fuel sources: glucose, which is sugar, and free fatty acids, which come from fat. But it does not use both equally at the same time. It must choose. And that choice is not based on willpower. It is based on the internal biological environment. When exercise intensity rises, heart rate increases sharply, breathing becomes heavy, and the brain receives an ancient message: immediate energy demand. In that state, the body prioritizes glucose. Sugar burns quickly, produces energy rapidly, and requires less oxygen. This survival mechanism was designed to help you escape danger, not to create a flat stomach. In the book Exercise Physiology, Nutrition, Energy, and Human Performance by McCardle, the concept of respiratory exchange ratio is used to measure exactly what the body is burning. When respiratory exchange ratio approaches 1.0, the body is primarily burning carbohydrate. When it approaches 0.7, the body is primarily burning fat. And here is the important part. As exercise intensity increases, respiratory exchange ratio increases as well. That means the harder you train, the higher the proportion of energy coming from sugar. This is where many people misunderstand the process. They assume that burning more calories automatically means burning more fat. But human physiology does not function in a simple linear way. Your body is an intelligent system that prioritizes safety before appearance. If the nervous system detects stress, it will lock fat away as a strategic reserve. Visceral fat, the fat surrounding internal organs, is particularly sensitive to stress. Research in endocrinology shows that this region contains a higher density of cortisol receptors than subcutaneous fat. That means when stress rises and cortisol increases, the body tends to protect and sometimes even accumulate more visceral fat. Not because your metabolism is broken, but because your biology is doing exactly what it was designed to do: keep you alive. So what happens when you walk at a moderate intensity? Heart rate remains stable. Breathing is controlled. Oxygen supply is sufficient. The nervous system does not activate an alarm state. In that environment, the body does not need rapid sugar. It begins to shift toward fat oxidation, the process of burning fat. Not because you force it, but because internal conditions allow it. This is the turning point of the entire conversation. Fat loss is not about fighting your body. It is about redesigning the signal you send to your nervous system. If you have ever felt frustrated thinking, "I am doing everything right and my belly fat will not go away," pause and consider a different perspective. The issue may not be the amount of movement. It may be the biological signal created during each session. In the next section, we will examine the cardio paradox: why the harder you run, the more stubborn belly fat can become, and the roles of lactate and cortisol in this process. Once you understand the mechanism, you will stop blaming yourself. You will begin working with your biology instead of against it. Have you ever experienced this feeling? Running until your legs shake, sweat soaking your shirt, your watch showing that you burned hundreds of calories, yet your waistline barely changes? If that sounds familiar, this section will explain exactly what is happening inside your body. The problem is not effort. The problem is biochemistry. When you train at high-intensity sprinting, high-intensity interval training, climbing hills, energy demand rises sharply, oxygen cannot fully meet the needs of your muscles. The body enters a state of relative oxygen shortage. In that state, it activates the fast glycolysis pathway, burning glucose to produce adenosine triphosphate immediately. This is a survival reflex, but it comes with lactate accumulation. Lactate is not just the substance associated with muscle fatigue. Biochemically, when lactate levels rise significantly, it inhibits the activity of hormone-sensitive lipase, the enzyme responsible for releasing triglycerides from fat cells. In other words, when lactate is high, the process of lipolysis is suppressed. You are still burning calories, but most of them are coming from sugar. This is not speculation. Research on fat max by Ochten and Jukendrup shows that fat oxidation reaches its peak at moderate intensity, typically around 45 to 65% of maximal oxygen uptake. When intensity exceeds the lactate threshold, the rate of fat burning drops noticeably, even though total calorie expenditure increases. That is the cardio paradox. You burn more total energy, but a smaller percentage comes from fat. And it does not stop there. Prolonged high-intensity exercise increases cortisol, the stress hormone. Cortisol is not harmful in the short term, but if you already have a high stress baseline from lack of sleep, work pressure, or prolonged dieting, each intense workout may add another layer of stress activation. Here is the critical point. Visceral fat is more sensitive to cortisol than subcutaneous fat. It contains a higher density of glucocorticoid receptors. When cortisol remains elevated over time, the body tends to protect and sometimes even prioritize storing fat in the deep abdominal region around the organs. Not because the body is working against you, but because, in survival logic, storing energy at the center of the body is the safest strategy. So if you train intensely day after day, while your nervous system remains in a heightened state of alert, the body receives the message. The environment is unstable. Energy must be conserved. What happens then? Effort increases. Fatigue increases. But the biological signal shifts toward protecting fat. This does not mean high-intensity interval training or fast running is wrong. They strongly improve maximal oxygen uptake, insulin sensitivity, and cardiovascular health. But if your primary goal is reducing visceral fat, especially in the context of high baseline stress, excessive intensity may not be the optimal strategy. Fat loss is not about forcing the body to burn more at any cost. It is about creating conditions in which the body is willing to release fat. In the next section, we will move into practical design, how walking can activate a mobilize and burn mechanism, releasing fat first and then burning it within the same cycle without triggering a stress response. If the previous section helped you understand why intense training is not necessarily optimal for belly fat, this section is where we redesign the signal. Not by doing more, but by training in the correct biological state, walking can become one of the most powerful fat-burning tools you have if you place it in the correct metabolic zone where the body is willing to release fat. The focus here is Zone 2. This is not a vague concept from social media. In physiology, it refers to an intensity level below the lactate threshold, where oxygen supply is sufficient for mitochondria, the energy factories inside your cells, to function optimally. When mitochondria receive enough oxygen, they prioritize the oxidation of fatty acids. There is no urgency, no emergency, no stress. The simplest way to identify this zone without a device is the talk test. If you can speak in full sentences but cannot sing comfortably, you are in the appropriate range. If you are breathing heavily and speaking in fragments, you have crossed the lactate threshold. At that point, the body shifts back to prioritizing sugar. However, walking at the same steady pace every day may lead the body to adapt and conserve energy. This is where an undulating rhythm becomes effective. The model is 3 minutes steady, followed by 1 minute of fast walking without running. During that faster minute, catecholamines, such as norepinephrine, increase slightly. These hormones send a signal to fat cells to release free fatty acids into the bloodstream. The key point is that the intensity increase is brief, not long enough to create significant lactate accumulation. When you return to Zone 2 pace, the oxygen-rich environment allows mitochondria to immediately burn the fat that was just mobilized. This is the mobilize and burn mechanism release first. then burn immediately rather than releasing and then restoring due to insufficient energy demand. The second often overlooked factor is arm swing. When you let your arms hang loosely or hold a phone, walking becomes primarily a lower body activity. But when you swing your arms from the shoulders, coordinating diagonally with your legs, the spine rotates gently through the thoracic region. Core muscles, upper back, and oblique muscles engage. Biomechanical research shows that proper arm swing can increase energy expenditure by approximately 15 to 20% without significantly increasing physiological stress. More importantly, rhythmic rotational movement activates the lymphatic system. Unlike the circulatory system, the lymphatic system does not have a central pump like the heart. It relies on mechanical movement. When lymph flow improves, inflammatory load decreases, and this creates a favorable internal environment for visceral fat, which is associated with low-grade chronic inflammation, to begin decreasing. The third factor is the biology of hunger. High-intensity cardio often increases neuropeptide Y and signals that promote compensatory eating. Moderate intensity walking does not strongly elevate these hormones. This means you can create an energy deficit without triggering a strong defensive response from the brain. No intense hunger, no evening rebound. This is critically important for long-term success. In biology, only signals that can be repeated without resistance lead to sustainable change. Therefore, walking done correctly is not a gentle beginner solution. It is a strategic refinement of neural, endocrine, and metabolic signaling. You do not force the body to burn fat. You place it in an environment where burning fat becomes the most logical choice. In the final section, we will discuss timing and hormones, because when you walk is just as important as how you walk. If the previous 3 sections focused on intensity and movement, this final section is about timing. In biology, timing can change the entire outcome. Your body is not the same at every moment of the day. In the morning, after a night of sleep, insulin levels are naturally low. The liver has used part of its glycogen stores. The system is not in a strong energy storage mode as it would be after a meal. This creates a biological window in which lipolysis, the release of fat, operates more favorably. But more favorable does not mean automatic fat loss. When you add caffeine in the morning, a cup of black coffee or green tea, the body increases the release of catecholamines such as adrenaline and norepinephrine. These hormones send a direct signal to fat cells, open the vault, and release free fatty acids into the bloodstream. The problem is this: releasing does not equal burning. If you drink coffee and remain sedentary, the nervous system is still stimulated. Cortisol may rise, free fatty acids are released, but if they are not fully used, the body must process them again. In a high cortisol environment, part of that excess energy tends to return to visceral fat, the region more sensitive to stress than others. That is why many people drink coffee every morning, hoping to burn fat, yet see little change when they do not move immediately afterward. Sequence is what determines the result. Low insulin. Caffeine activates fat mobilization. Zone 2, walking immediately afterward, creates oxidative demand. When you enter light to moderate movement with sufficient oxygen and without excessive nervous system activation, mitochondria begin using the very fatty acids that were just mobilized as fuel. This becomes a clean metabolic loop. Mobilize, burn, without prolonged stress. An important point must be emphasized. This does not turn the morning into a miracle solution. Long-term energy balance, sleep quality, and baseline stress remain decisive factors. But if you want a strategy that is intelligent rather than extreme, leveraging the biological window of the morning is a rational advantage. Belly fat loss is not a battle against calories. It is coordination between the nervous system, endocrine system, and metabolism according to the body's natural circadian rhythm. When you understand this, you stop asking, how much harder do I need to push? And you begin asking, am I applying the right signal at the right time? The body is not working against you. It is responding to the environment you create. When the environment is right, visceral fat no longer needs to stay. And that is when change happens quietly. without extremes but sustainably.